Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. And Paige, I'm an alcoholic. And yeah, let's dive into it. So where we're going to be picking up today is chapter 1, page 1, Bill's story. And hopefully we can find that one. We're out of the Roman numerals. It's easy to find the pages. But I just wanted to sort of explain, what are we doing here with Bill's story? You see, I don't know about you, but my first several introductions to Bill Wilson were, I don't know, I didn't like the guy. I didn't think we had anything in common. I thought he's this old, probably my age, I got sober young. This old white guy, stockbroker. He wasn't even a stockbroker, he was a stock speculator. But I thought all these things about him. I thought he had nothing to do with me, and I didn't relate. But when I was taken through this book, with somebody who is properly armed with facts about themselves, I was able to see Bill's story in my life in Bill's story, and our shared and common experience. And now when I refer to Bill, I'm like, Billy Dubs, my homie, he's my guy. I just love him. And so that is what I'm hoping we can do today, is that we can begin to have a new experience with Bill Wilson and Bill's story. But also, why is his story here? Well, in the chapter Working with Others, on page 92, it describes what we are to do when we carry the message to a newcomer. And it is to share our experience with the illness of alcoholism, to dwell on the hopeless feature of the malady, to explain the allergy, to dive into the hopelessness of the mental obsession, to then explain how we recovered and the course of action that we took to get there. And that's the purpose of Bill's story. Bill Wilson, in his story, is trying to 12-step us, to carry this message to us. So that's what we're doing. And again, for those that don't know, Bill's story is the story of Bill Wilson, Alcoholics Anonymous's co-founder, and also my homie. I guarantee if he were alive today, he would not be like my homie, but he's my homie. I love him. All right, so let's kick it off. Page 1, chapter 1, Bill's story. So it says, war fever. And when we talk about war fever, the war that we are specifically referencing is World War I. And if it is helpful to put things in a timeline, which I often find quite helpful, so man, you're getting some dates. Oh, is this Tinder over here? The dates you guys are going to be getting. That was a metaphor. This is not Tinder. There was a safety statement in the chat. No. But the dates. World War I occurred from 1914 to 1918. So that's the war that we're talking about. So war fever ran high in the New England town to which we new young officers from Plattsburgh were assigned. And so that war fever is that idea of like, Bill Wilson is seeing this like an exciting adventure. It's exciting. The horrors of the war haven't really hit him on an emotional level. And Plattsburgh is just a city in New York. And so he had entered the military and was in officers' academy. So he was training to be an officer. And it says, and we were flattered when the first citizens took us to their homes, making us feel heroic. And there's that moment. Ooh, and by the way, has he done any war? He has not done the war. He has been doing probably some of the marching and maybe like crawling a little and maybe some, shooting targets, that sort of thing. He has not done the war, but already he feels heroic. It says here was love, applause, war, moments sublime with intervals hilarious. And from this it leads into, I was part of life at last. I was part of life at last. And that line is important because what that means is up until this moment, he felt apart from life. He felt separate from life. He felt like an outsider. Now, I cannot diagnose my alcoholism based solely on that, but it is something that many of us can intimately relate to. That feeling growing up that who I am is not enough. That feeling that I don't fit, that feeling that I don't belong. Again, we cannot diagnose alcoholism off of this, but that is what we are going to treat in Alcoholics Anonymous. So it says, I was part of life at last. And in the midst of my excitement, I discovered liquor. Uh-oh. That's not good. Foreshadowing. No, that's not actual foreshadowing. I'm offering the foreshadowing. I'm like, y'all. So it says, I forgot the strong warnings and the prejudices of my people concerning drink. Now, what that line means is that Bill Wilson came from a long line of alcoholics. There was alcoholism in his family, and he was warned not to drink. And one of the things that I often do when I'm doing the big book study is I love, when we get into Bill's story, I love to bring up the book Lois Remembers. And part of why I do that is because Lois was sober. She probably remembered. Bill was in a blackout. And to be fair, is it the most historically accurate of the books? No. Lois would write, in Bill's favor and all that sort of stuff. But it sort of illuminates. It offers a perspicacity, a light, an illumination of Bill's story, where we get to see not just, okay, Bill, you shouldn't drink, but Bill's experience gets to come alive. And again, why do you have this preference over Lois Remembers over some of the other historical books? It's because I have it in arm's reach. It was just right there, and I was able to grab it. That's why. There's a method to my madness. So if you have your copy of Lois Remembers handy, because why wouldn't you? We always carry our pocket edition of Lois Remembers up and down the mountaintop. But it's on page 22. And it says, bottom paragraph, if you have a copy. You don't need a copy. You don't have to run out and grab a Lois Remembers. I'm going to read all this stuff. But again, I want to have this experience of this thing coming alive. So it says, Bill had been warned since childhood not to touch alcohol. His mother had divorced his father largely because of drink, he thought. His paternal grandfather, and we're going to talk about this guy later on in Bill's story. His paternal grandfather had also had bad drinking episodes, but through some kind of transforming experience, had stopped drinking completely. If Bill once began, he had been warned he too might get into trouble. He believed this, and he decided not to drink. Later, I marveled. This is Lois. Lois Remembers, so his wife. I marveled that this had been enough reason for a man like Bill, whose independent spirit had always led him into experimenting. And so we can hold ourselves up to Bill's experience. I'll be honest, my experience is that I did not come from a family of alcoholics. There was not a whole lot of alcoholism in my family. But for many of us, there is. For many of us, there were people who bore witness to the ravages of alcoholism directly in front of them. Did I see that? Did I see parents or siblings or loved ones or aunts or uncles have their lives destroyed and ruined as the result of alcoholism? And say, I shouldn't do it. Or were we given warning from some of our family members? You shouldn't drink. It's not a good idea for you to drink. Is that my experience? And it says, in time, we sailed for over there. Over there is where most of y'all are at. The UK, over there. And actually, I'm pretty sure, now I'm not going to try to sing it, but I'm pretty sure there was a song at the time. Oh man, it's going to come out of my face like a song though. Where there's a song where it's like, yeah, Rob knows, over there, over there. Listen, I do not have any musical talent. And I apologize profusely. You don't want me at karaoke, whether I'm drunk or sober. That is my gift to you, abstaining from that activity. But that was the song, like over there. So going over to the United Kingdom and then over to Europe to fight in this war. It goes on to say, I was very lonely and again turned to alcohol. So where we're at is at the bottom of the very first paragraph, page 1, Bill's story. And what we are seeing is that Bill Wilson is actively and intentionally using alcohol to treat the spiritual malady. That's what we're seeing. Second time alcohol is mentioned. At first it was fun. It was, woo, I'm drinking. I'm a part of life. But now he's on the ships going over and he's feeling very lonely and again turns to alcohol. Thank you, Rob. I knew it was a song, 1917. Look at me. Look at me knowing music. You can't quiz me on any music. I'm not musically inclined. Anywho, but when it says I was very lonely, here's what I learned. Loneliness has nothing to do with a sense of separateness from you. And I'll share with you what I mean by that. You see, I don't know about you, but I have felt absolutely lonely and alone in a stadium full of other people. And I don't know about you, but I know what it is like to feel absolutely lonely and alone in the middle of a meeting of Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't know about you, but I know what it is like to feel absolutely, utterly lonely and alone in the middle of a relationship. And I know what it is like to feel absolutely lonely and alone in the middle of an act of intimacy. You see, loneliness has nothing to do with a sense of separateness from you. I did not know what it meant to be lonely, but what I have come to awaken to is that loneliness is a conscious sense, simply a sense of separateness from God, higher power, creator, spirit of the universe. And that is how I lived my life, with a gaping hole in the depth of my soul that nothing could fill, but I was trying to drown it out with alcohol. And that hole was a bottomless pit, and there was never enough alcohol that I could drown it in. And again, having a spiritual malady, having a sense of loneliness, that does not make me an alcoholic, because there are other human beings that feel that way. But it is important to understand, again, that is what we treat in Alcoholics Anonymous. We treat that sense of emptiness. We treat that sense of loneliness. And we do it. By the way, if you're like, but how? We don't do it in the meetings. We do it. And the meetings are wonderful, by the way. I love the meetings. I'm as pro meeting. I love it. You know, even when I was like miserable, I love the meetings. But we treat it through the spiritual awakening. And how we have a spiritual awakening is through the tangible actions of the 12 steps. It goes on to say, we landed in England. Some of you guys are there. England. Woo! We landed in England. I visited Winchester Cathedral. So to put this into historical context, he lands in England August of 1918. The war is going to end November 11th, Remembrance Day for those in Canada and those in the UK, of 1918. And so he's right at the very tail end of the war. Now, when it says I visited Winchester Cathedral, what I'm going to do, and I know Rob's going to put stuff in the chat too, but I like to screen share when I can. This is Winchester Cathedral, and it is this beautiful. I mean, as a Canadian, I'm like, ooh, that is breathtaking. Would you look at the architecture? I don't think it's Baroque architecture, but Baroque was the word of the day last week. It would have fit this week too. I don't think it is. So he is in Winchester Cathedral, and he's visiting because it's a tour. It's a beautiful cathedral. It's a tourist site, and then it goes on to say, much moved, I wandered outside. Now, when he says much moved, there's a lot there. Much moved. He doesn't want to lay it on thick. For us, like it's a little too heavy to explain on page 1 of his story. But there is something deeper that happened there. And again, we're going to look into Lois Remembers, offer a little perspicacity about what happened. So page 25, if you have your book. Page 25, and it's 1, 2, 3, 4, fourth paragraph down. Again, you don't need a copy of Lois Remembers. I just like to reference it. So it says, soon after his arrival in Southampton, Bill wrote to me. Also about an experience he had in Winchester Cathedral. He was feeling depressed, lonely, and fearful of what lay ahead. Now I'm going to interject a little bit. Bill Wilson he was plagued by two things. One, he was plagued at this time by the fear of death. He, like at this point, the sort of dawning realization of the horrors of World War I were upon him. Now, Bill Wilson never saw frontline combat, but he would have had the understanding of what was possibly to lie before him, and he was desperately afraid of that. But at the same time, he was also terribly afraid of being seen as a coward. And can I relate to that? Can I relate to putting myself into that no-win situation where whatever I do, I am afraid. Whatever I do, I'm trapped in fear. Can I relate to that? Because that's where Bill is. And maybe it's not the horrors of the front line of the First World War that I'm facing, but maybe it's work in the morning or another day of this drudgery where I am so afraid to face life one day at a time, but I'm also afraid to ask for help and let you know that I'm hurting. Can I relate to that? So it says he was feeling depressed and lonely and fearful of what lay ahead. But upon entering the cathedral, its atmosphere seemed to take possession of him, and he was lifted up into a sort of ecstasy. Though he was not a conscious believer in God at that time, he felt a mighty assurance that things were all right and would continue to be. And what happens for him is he has this moment, this spiritual experience. It's not enough to keep him sober. It's not enough for him to stay sober, but he has an experience of God, an experience of a power greater than himself that comes to him where he's riddled with self and worry and fear, and a calming presence comes over him. And this was an important moment in his life, so important that he's going to reference this 2 or 3 times going forward in Bill's story. So much moved, I wandered outside. My attention was caught by a doggerel on an old tombstone. The doggerel is the epitaph, the inscription, that piece of poetry. And it says, "Here lies a Hampshire grenadier who caught his death drinking cold small beer. A good soldier is ne'er forgot, whether he dieth by musket or by pot." Now, when Lois remembers, it says, in a daze, he strolled out into the churchyard. Suddenly, he was brought down to earth by the name on a headstone. Thomas Thatcher. Perhaps an ancestor of his good friend, Ebby Thatcher, had been buried there. So Bill Wilson is wandering, like any of us do after we have a profound experience of the spirit of the universe. He goes and tropes his way through the graveyard, a little morbid, no judge. And he sees this tombstone. It's a lot of people do have photos of themselves with it. It's a tall tombstone. It would be, maybe armpit height for most people, I guess. I'm not good at heights. Bear with me. But he sees this tombstone, and on this tombstone, it has the name Thomas Thatcher. And you can see it here, Thomas, Thetcher. And he died in 1764 at the age of 26. Now, it's also important I point out May 12th. Rob, don't let me forget to make this point. I'm going to tie it in, but I'm going to do it in a bit. So I'm just letting you know, that's a little period for me to come back to it. So Thomas Thatcher. And so Bill Wilson sees this, and why this tombstone of all tombstones is because he had an old friend by the name of Ebby Thatcher. And if you don't know the story yet, if you do know the story, you know why this might be an important experience, and perhaps not a coincidence. But if you don't know the story, Ebby Thatcher is Bill Wilson's friend who's going to bring Bill Wilson the knowledge of what our solution is in Alcoholics Anonymous, the spiritual awakening. And he's going to bring us knowledge of what the program of action is, what later became the 12 steps. And so Bill Wilson reads this, and when it says, "Here lies a Hampshire grenadier." So Thomas Thatcher was a gentleman from a place called Hampshire. It's just a place in the UK. And to be a grenadier would be to be somebody that was comparably in the artillery unit. So Bill Wilson sees that this is a young soldier, just like he's a young soldier in an artillery unit, just like he was in an artillery unit, like a grenadier, like think grenades, right? So dealing with these explosives, that sort of thing. And when it says, who caught his death drinking good, cold, small beer, how Bill Wilson is reading this tombstone, how he's reading it, is here is a young soldier who died of alcoholism. It goes on to say, a good soldier is ne'er forgot. We don't forget. We will always remember and hold in our heart a good soldier, whether he dieth by musket, which is to say he dies valiantly in the battlefield, going down in a blaze of bullets and glory, or by pot. Now, pot, we're not talking about the green stuff. We're talking about, that was a unit of alcohol. And so that is how Bill Wilson read that story. Now, just for some historical accuracy and a larger point, Thomas Thetcher probably did not die of alcohol and alcoholism. At that time in history, especially on a battlefield, waterborne illnesses was incredibly common. So it is far more likely, historically speaking, that he contracted like cholera or dysentery or typhoid, like one of those types of illnesses. And because he had got it likely from drinking infected water, they often had this type of alcohol because it was fermented, that it was safe to drink. And it was very, very, very low alcohol content. So they put him, likely what happened is they switched him to this type of alcohol that was low alcohol content, but the illness had already taken its course, and he had died. Now, does it matter whether he died of dysentery or alcoholism? No. What matters is Bill Wilson saw the tombstone and read it, that he died of alcoholism. And that's an important thing. Whenever we go through the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, sometimes there's a polished, sort of glossy version, and we come to find out, wait a minute, it didn't really happen like that. Abby and Bill weren't at the kitchen table. They were upstairs and Lois was there. Yeah. But we don't need to get bogged down in the details. The history of Alcoholics Anonymous is a parable. A parable is a story to convey a lesson or a meaning. And so this is a parable. It's a lesson. It's a story. And so one of the things about the history of Alcoholics Anonymous, and part of why I love it, is, if you're struggling with the belief that there could be a power greater than oneself, there could be a God or a higher power, man, we see it all over the coincidences or the lack of coincidences and the seconds and inches by which none of us should have been here. And the fact that this grave stuck out to him because of his childhood friend. Now, another coincidence is the 12th of May, when he passed away, Thomas Thetcher. Because a number of years later, I haven't done the math. I had previously done the math, and now I don't remember the math. But in May 12th of 1935, Bill Wilson sat down with another alcoholic by the name of Dr. Bob and carried his message to that alcoholic. And these moments of connection, I don't think they're any mistake. And so. And also, I'll point out that at the bottom it says that this is a replica. And so Bill Wilson did see the replica, but if you're ever in and around Winchester Cathedral, you can go and see the replica that's there, which is what Bill would have seen, I believe. And then if you want to see the original, you have to go into the church and talk to somebody. That's just my little tourist information. Have I been there? No. Why do I know that? I don't know. But I want you to be all prepared for your trip to Winchester Cathedral if you decide to go. So that's all for me for the screen share. I got plenty of time. Some of you are like, no, could you wrap it up, girl? I'm doing my best. Alrighty. So, ominous warning, which I failed to heed. And so what happens is that struck him. And we can look at what ominous warnings that we've had in our life. What ominous warnings, And that did we meet with that same insouciance where it's like, nah, I don't gotta be worried about that. Who cares, right? What ominous warnings have I had in my life? And I'll tell you my ominous warning. I grew up, because I'm Canadian, I grew up in Canada, continue to live there. Nothing, not much has changed. But in health class, for some reason, they showed us the movie Rudy, and a million times, but also this movie, and it was called The Thin Blue Line or The Blue Lens, something like that. And it was a bunch of our police officers that had documentary cameras that were interviewing drug addicts, heroin addicts on East Hastings, the downtown East Side. And that is probably the most ravaged area of poverty, of the illness of addiction that you would find in Canada, if not North America. Like it is brutal. And we would see this movie again and again and again and again. Who wasn't scared straight? Me. But I would see this film and there were some moments in it where it was like, it was brutal, like just brutal. And I never thought that I was going to be in a tent or behind a dumpster. And we know where I ended up, like a lady, pinkies up, classy. So I never thought that was going to be me. I never thought that I was going to end up like that. But I did have that experience but I get it. I get it. You know what I mean? Like, I was like, I get why they're doing it. In the 7th grade. I'm like, I could just see, and that for me was my ominous warning, which I failed to heed. And so that means didn't listen to it. He had the ominous warning, whatever, doesn't relate to me. All good in the hood. And so again, can I relate to that? Being told there's alcoholism in my family, it's not a good idea to drink. Having early warning signs, it is not a good idea for me to drink. And me taking those early signs and think, doesn't apply to me, woo! Can I relate to that? It says 22 and a veteran of foreign wars, I went home at last. Now, a lot of times people will read into Bill Wilson a whole lot of ego. Now, I'm going to point some stuff out. I'm going to point out where I don't see ego, and then we'll see where we might see a little bit. So it says, I fancied myself a leader. And we might be like, oh, Bill, little high and mighty, thinking you saw something. But it says, for had not the men of my battery given me a special token of appreciation. So he's saying, I feel like I'm a leader. Keep in mind, he was trained as an officer, which is a leadership position. And he was given a commendation. And one of the things I remember was a pocket watch. There was some other stuff that he was given as a commemoration to say, yes, Bill, you are a good leader. It was like a little gold star. Now, I did hear, whether or not this is a sneaky rumor, that they did give that to all of the people who were officers. So, maybe he was reading into it a little bit. But, fancied myself a leader. That's just him being aware of his qualities. His ego is not out of control right there. And it says, and he's got some evidence to back it up. He goes on to say, my talent for leadership, I imagined, would place me at the head of vast enterprises, which I would manage with the utmost assurance. So he's like, I'm going to be CEO of everything. Business, I'm in charge. Rock and roll. Kicking butt, taking names. Business, importance, money. That might be where his ego's a little out of whack. Just a scotch. But I'll point something out as we continue on, that this ego that I would read into, that I couldn't relate to, is driven by something that I could relate to. And keep in mind, I did not think that I was going to be Little Miss Business Pants and the CEO of anything. But did I have these feelings of grandiosity? Can we relate to that? Again, this is not what is going to define us as alcoholics, but again, we want Bill's story to come alive in our lives and see where we have experiences like his, of course, very specifically as it pertains to his drinking and his attempts to stop. And that's what we're going to see later on. So we flip the page, page 2. I took a night law course. And if you're interested in the who, what, where's, why's, where he went was Brooklyn Law School. And I want to point something out for a second. Sometimes the language of the book Alcoholics Anonymous might feel a little overwhelming or a little inaccessible. And I want to point something out, that Bill Wilson was educated as a lawyer in the 1920s. So we know lawyers, they're paid for those big fancy words, you know. I'm trying to think of a big fancy lawyer word. Jurisprudence. I don't know. Man, I am struggling today. So he's paid for the big fancy lawyer words. And so, and as a lawyer in the 1920s, so that's why some of the language in the book is a little antiquated, outdated, archaic, and verbose, which is to be like long and well, you know, like me, verbose. So I took a night law course. But one of the things about the law course that I also want to bring our attention to is lawyers aren't just paid for the big fancy word. Lawyers are also paid and trained to be very particular with their words. Because when you're drawing up contracts or you're pleading a case in court or you're not interrogating, but in court and asking questions of a witness, you need to do so in a very specific way so that no loopholes are left open. And so the takeaway for us from that is, yep, he's going to use some big old-timey words, but we're going to break them down and have a cool experience with them. We're going to grow your lexicon. You're going to have a whole new vocabulary by the time you're done with this story. Not for better, for worse. I'm so sorry. You'll be using the word lexicon, lemon squeezy, easy breezy. But why we are going through this book line by line, word by word, breaking it down, is because he was trained to write with precision. And we want to study this thing with precision and get knowledge of what are the directions that I need to take. So that's something that's important. And it says, so he took a night law course and obtained employment as an investigator for a surety company. Now, again, if you care about the who's and the what's what, that surety company was U.S. Fidelity and Guarantee Co. So U.S. Fidelity and Guarantee Company. But it's actually more important that I explain thank you, Rob, that I explain what a surety company is and what an investigator does, because this is going to connect some dots and make some stuff later on make so much sense. So a surety company is a company that gives loans to businesses. That gives loans to companies and businesses. And what an investigator does is goes to these companies who want to get loans and investigates them to see if they're a good investment, if they're going to pay back the loan, if they're, what's happening? Are they doing a fire sale and just trying to get some money and are going to rip off the company? Or is the company growing? Or what do the financials look like? So that is Bill Wilson's early employment experience. Investigating these companies to see if they are soluble, to see if they're going to make money, to see if they're a good investment. So it says the drive for success was on. And I want to point out, he is not driving. He is being driven. That need for success is pulling him in life. He goes on to say, I'd prove to the world I was important. And that for me is an important line. A lot of times we read into Bill's ego. But here's what I know to be true. I don't have to prove that which I know that I am. Now, if I came to the Big Book study here today and I was like, hey guys, I'm sober, you'd be like, okay. And if I was like, no, listen, I am sober, clean and sober. I've been sober since November 17th, 2009. Sober, heckin' sober, super sober. You'd be like, oh my gosh, is she drinking? You know what I mean? I don't have to prove that which I know that I am. And what it tells me is that Bill Wilson, at the core of who he is, does not feel he is important. Because if he felt that way, he wouldn't need to prove it. We're going to read some more about Bill, who's going to confirm that that's not just my theory and not just me reading into stuff. Bill Wilson was plagued by a terrible sense of inferiority. So do I have that drive to prove to the world I was important? Maybe not in business, but yeah. I was trying to prove that I had value and worth and that I wasn't the giant piece of garbage that I felt like I was deep down in my soul. I can relate to that. Again, that does not make me an alcoholic, but that is what we treat in Alcoholics Anonymous through the 12 steps. That's what the spiritual awakening treats. My work took me about Wall Street, and little by little, I became interested in the market. Many people lost money, but some became very rich. Why not I? Oh boy, Bill. I studied economics and business as well as law. Potential alcoholic that I was, I nearly failed my law course. At one of the finals, I was too drunk to think or write. Now, what I want us to write right there is that is the physical allergy. This is the first time that we are seeing one of the first symptoms of alcoholism, the allergy of the body. Because keep in mind, this is not a high schooler. Now, the Canadians know getting drunk in a field. Because there's something about our Canadians in our teenage years. We'll get drunk in a bush party, which means getting drunk in a field or in a forest. A little bit of Canadiana. So this is not a teenager experimenting with alcohol and trying to find his limits. This is a grown 20-something-year-old man showing up to I want to point out, a final exam in law school. And he's showing up so drunk he cannot think or write. That is a sign that he does not have the ability to control the amount that he takes. He is paying for law school. You know what I mean? He's paying for it. If he had the ability to control the amount, he would have stopped before, insanely drunk, too drunk to think, too drunk to write. He would have had a couple of beers the night before to unwind, to relax, to, kind of loosen his nerves, and he would have stopped there. But what likely happened is he had to drink a day or even 2 days before to probably unwind from studying. And the allergy took him. He needed another and another and another and another. And he could not stop. He could not slow down. He's showing up to the final exam too drunk to think or write. Now, do we have any experience with that? Do we know what it's like to show up absolutely plastered to a final exam? It wasn't a final, it was a midterm, but I was, when you're doing the one eye? Yeah, it is really hard to do algebra with the one eye going. You're like, whoa, the numbers are moving. A squared plus B squared equals what? I can't do it. Do I have any examples from my own life of where I just needed to drink responsibly and that allergy took me and I messed it up? Do I know what that's like? It goes on to say, though my drinking was not yet continuous, so he was not a 24/7, 365, he was not a daily drinker, it disturbed my wife. Now we cannot pause and ask ourselves, do we have any experience where long before we had a problem with alcohol, or we thought we had a problem with alcohol, people in our lives were on our back about it and worried about us and nagging us and telling us we should slow down, maybe you shouldn't drink, Paige, you're being irresponsible? Does that sound a little familiar? He goes on to say, we had long talks when I would still her forebodings by telling her that men of genius conceive their best projects when drunk, that the most majestic constructions of philosophic thought were so derived. Listen, Bill, what are you on about? So Bill Wilson, he's drinking and he's showing definite signs of the allergy, that he is not able to control the amount he drinks once he starts. His wife Lois is saying, Bill, I'm worried about you. Bill, I don't think you should drink so much. Bill, I'm worried you don't have control. And when Bill says, I stilled her forebodings, that is to calm her fears. And he calmed her fears by saying, Lois, you don't understand. Socrates, Aristotle, Plato. I'm trying to think of other philosophers like I don't know. I don't got him today. A philosopher is not the word of the day. Don't worry about it. But like all these men of economic genius, of philosophical genius, man, they had their best ideas while imbibing upon the intoxicant of alcohol. Lois, you don't understand. Alcohol makes me think. It makes me creative. It's going to help me succeed and get far in life. That's what he's doing. Now, I want you to know that I did not have that level of unmitigated gall. My gall was heavily mitigated by the early consequences. I'm behind a dumpster with wet pants. I could not show up and be like, I am a philosopher. You weren't buying that. It's like, girl, where's your shoes? I'm philosophizing. That wasn't going to land. But do I know what it is like to defend it with everything that is in me? No, you don't understand. I need it. No, I can't give it up. If you went through what I went through, you'd have to drink too. Do I relate to defending it? And it says, by the time I had completed the course, I knew the law was not for me. The inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. And yeah, like Rob says, turmoil. And I think of like a whirling dervish, like a tornado. And if you think of any movie or show that contains Wall Street, or even like any parody of it, in any time in history, what you see is these like papers flying and these men in suits yelling, buy, buy, sell, sell. And it is chaos and excitement, and money is being made and money is being lost. And it's invigorating. And again, that doesn't make us alcoholic, but I will say many of us have quite a penchant for chaos. Penchant for chaos, title is some inventory I've written, let me tell you. And if you're here today and if you're newly sober and you're like, man, I am missing the chaos of my alcoholism. I'm missing that drama and intrigue. Just get involved in service. You'll find it there. That's my little plug for join ODAAT. Get involved in service. You're welcome. So the inviting maelstrom of Wall Street had me in its grip. Business and financial leaders were my heroes. Out of this alloy of drink and speculation, I commenced to forge the weapon that would one day turn in its flight like a boomerang and all but cut me to ribbons. Now, an alloy is a mixture of two metals. So we're combining drinking and we're combining his speculation on Wall Street. And he's going to combine them to forge a weapon. And you can imagine like a sword that he is going to use to hack, to slash, and to cut his way through life to prove that he is important. And what does that tell me? If I need a weapon to show up to life, that means I do not see the world as a safe place. Can I relate to that? Now, I grew up in the 90s. And on TV, they had the show Hercules, and it was always followed by the show Xena. Some of you know what I'm talking about, and some of you don't. I'm going to lose some of you. Yeah, Xena. Yeah, the thing, Xena, the warrior princess. And so Xena, she would have this weapon, and it was like a throwing weapon, and she would throw it, and then they would have these cuts, and it would go ching, ching, choo, 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 and it would like bounce off things and get the bad guys, and then it would come back to her, and she would catch it. And so that's that. If you grew up in the 90s and watched Xena, the warrior princess, that is a helpful visual to reference this part of the story. If you have not seen that, which is probably most of you, that was not helpful, please disregard. But it's that idea that this weapon that he's using to move through life, and it's going to work. What happens is it eventually turns on him. And it says, like a boomerang, and tears him apart. So can I relate to the idea that alcohol is what I needed to get through life, what I needed to live life, maybe to even be successful. I've never been successful, but for some of y'all, to be successful, and then it turns on me and tears me apart. And the thing about the boomerang that I think is so interesting and is so important in like talking about what Bill Wilson is like. Let's talk about it. So we're going to pop over to Lois Remembers. And just the boomerang it's so interesting to me. So Lois Remembers, page 20. If you happen to have a copy handy, why would you? First full paragraph. Judy's got it. Yeah, Judy. Popping up the Lois Remembers. Everyone's a cool kid, even if you don't have a copy of Lois Remembers. I love you. So first full paragraph, page 20. Bill always liked to work with tools. As a boy, he made bows and arrows, skis, jack jumpers, and sleds. One day, his grandfather told him that only the Australians could make a boomerang, a weapon that would return to the thrower. so that it was only something the indigenous Australians could do. And so that got into Bill. Bill determined to be the first American to make and throw a boomerang. After that, no schoolwork was done. No wood brought in. Boomerangs were the order of the day. Morning, night, and noon. Bill was either studying books on Australia or hacking away in the shop on a piece of wood. Time after time, he thought he had solved the puzzle, but the weapon didn't return. And keep in mind, having a hyperfixation does not make us alcoholic, but I'll just throw it out there. Does anyone relate to that? Get a little too involved in something? Yeah. And I love this. It says but it didn't return. After about 6 months of failure, and that 6 months is an interesting period of time. Because again, if we know a little about Bill Wilson and about his history, he was trying to carry this message to other alcoholics and had 6 months of failure trying to 12-step others. And on May 12th, he sat down with Dr. Bob, who was Bill Wilson's first successful 12-step call. So that 6 months of failure, it's such an interesting how these things tie in. Don't worry, I got an eye on the time. Nobody was nervous. Peppa was being delightful and chill, but I just wanted to make sure she was all right. Eye on the time. All right, after 6 months of failure, he was going to bed in his attic room one night when he noticed the grain in the headboard of his bed. It was just the thing he needed. He ran for his saw and cut the piece out. Since he had already burned part of the headboard in an early experiment, he didn't think Graham would scold him, which I love. When the boomerang was cut and sanded, his grandfather watched as Bill threw it across the churchyard. Gramp had to jump to save his neck. The boomerang returned to its thrower, the way a genuine Australian one would. Bill was sure he was the first American to accomplish this feat. And here's the takeaway. After his previous sense of inferiority and awkwardness, it was great to feel that he was the number one man in boomerang making. And so what is driving him is that terrible sense of inferiority. Now, next week, I stopped us in the middle of the paragraph, which is always a natural and easy place to end and to wrap it up. But next week, we're going to see Bill Wilson create that weapon, and we're going to see that weapon work for him. So with that, 2 minutes left. That's not great. Over to Peppa. Thank you.